We are noticing a pattern, and honestly, it's getting harder to ignore. Every time a high-profile couple travels overseas, every time a relationship looks perfect on the outside, something dark seems to follow behind the scenes. In this case, it has the internet completely divided. A luxury trip to Zanzibar, a celebration, a future engagement, and then suddenly everything turns into confusion, silence, and allegations that nobody saw coming. A woman gone, a fiancé under pressure, and a timeline that just doesn't add up for a lot of people watching from the outside. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because the internet isn't just reacting anymore, it's investigating. Screenshots, hotel reports, witness claims, and conflicting stories are all circulating at the same time. Some people are pointing at arguments before the incident. Others are questioning delays in reporting. And some are saying there's a much deeper story that hasn't fully been told yet. And the most disturbing part? The silence. Because in moments like this, silence doesn't just feel like grief. It starts to feel like suspicion. But we need to be very clear, nothing has been fully confirmed in court. There are reports, there are claims, and there is an active investigation, but the full truth is still not officially public. And that's exactly why the story is exploding online. Because when answers are missing, the internet creates its own. So now the question is not just what happened. The real question is, why does this story feel like it has more layers than what we're being told? And what really happened inside that villa in Zanzibar that turned a romantic getaway into one of the most talked about developing cases online? Stay with us, because what comes next changes the entire direction of this story. After that disturbing wave of online reactions, one thing became clear immediately. This story was no longer just about a couple's private dispute. It had turned into a full-scale public investigation in the eyes of the internet. Reports circulating online claimed that Ashlee Jenae and her fiancé Joe McCann had traveled to Zanzibar, Tanzania for what was meant to be a luxury birthday celebration and engagement-style getaway. A trip that, on the surface, looked like a new chapter in their relationship. But according to multiple unverified accounts and early reports, things inside the trip were already tense before anything tragic unfolded. Sources online claim there were repeated arguments between the couple during their stay at a high-end villa resort. Some say hotel staff became aware of ongoing disputes. Others allege the situation escalated enough that staff had to intervene and separate them into different accommodations. However, it's important to note, none of these claims have been officially confirmed in court at this stage. What is confirmed through circulating reports is that emergency services were eventually called to the villa where Ashlee was staying after she was reportedly found unresponsive. She was transported for medical treatment, but later passed away, according to widely shared reports. And that's where the case begins to take a sharp turn in public discussion. Because instead of clarity, what followed was confusion. Different versions of events started appearing online almost immediately. Some reports suggest Joe McCann was the one who discovered her. Others claim hotel staff were the first to enter the room. And some accounts describe a delayed response before authorities were fully notified. This conflicting information is exactly what has fueled the ongoing debate across social media platforms. People are asking questions not just about what happened, but about the timeline itself. Why was there a delay in communication? Why were there multiple versions of how she was found? And why has so much of the early narrative changed as more details allegedly come forward? At the same time, it's critical to highlight that authorities have not released a final verified conclusion, and investigations are reportedly still ongoing. But in the absence of clear answers, speculation has filled the gap. Online commentators have pointed to Joe McCann's behavior following the incident, including reports that he quickly sought legal representation and remained publicly silent during the early stages of the investigation. Supporters argue that this could be a normal legal response in a sensitive situation. Critics, however, view the silence as unusual given the severity of the circumstances. Meanwhile, Ashlee's family has also spoken out through statements shared online, expressing frustration over the lack of clarity and communication they received in the immediate aftermath. According to those statements, Ashlee had been in contact with family during the trip and had described both excitement and tension leading up to the incident. One detail often mentioned in circulating accounts is that she had reportedly told family members about disagreements during the trip, though again, these details remain unverified outside of social media and secondary reporting. As the investigation developed, reports emerged that international authorities and embassy officials became involved, adding another layer of seriousness to the case. This reportedly led to further questioning of individuals connected to the situation and a closer review of timelines, communications, and hotel records. But even with that, no final public conclusion has been released confirming exactly what happened in those final hours. And that uncertainty is what continues to drive global attention toward this case. Because the internet is now split into three major perspectives, one group believes this was a tragic incident still under investigation and should not be rushed into judgment. Another group believes inconsistencies in the timeline suggest deeper unanswered questions that need full transparency. And a third group is warning that social media is dangerously turning speculation into accusations before official findings are complete. What makes this situation even more intense is the setting itself, a luxury resort in a foreign country, where legal systems, jurisdiction, and evidence handling can become far more complex than cases handled domestically. That complexity has only added to public curiosity and confusion. At this stage, what remains clear is simple. A young woman lost her life. A fiancé is under intense public scrutiny. And a full investigation is still reportedly ongoing. Everything else circulating online remains part of an evolving and unconfirmed narrative. And as this case continues to develop, one thing becomes more obvious with every update: the gap between public perception and verified truth is widening fast. The confusion surrounding this case only deepened as more time passed without a clear, official conclusion. What initially started as a single incident report has now evolved into a multi-layered investigation, with different versions of events continuing to circulate online. And in the absence of verified updates, speculation has only grown louder. One of the biggest points of discussion remains the timeline. According to circulating reports, Ashlee was found after a domestic dispute inside the villa she was staying in with her fiancé. However, the exact sequence of events leading up to her being discovered is still not publicly confirmed in full detail by authorities. Different accounts describe different moments, from staff intervention earlier in the day, to a later discovery inside the room, to delays in communication before emergency response. And that inconsistency is exactly what has kept this case trending. Because in situations like this, people don't just look at what is said. They start focusing on what is missing. One of the key factors being discussed online is the behavior of individuals involved after the incident. Reports circulating on social media claim there was a delay in notifying family members and authorities, though official documents verifying the exact timing have not been publicly released in full detail. This gap between reported timelines and confirmed information is what continues to fuel suspicion and debate across platforms. At the same time, it is important to recognize that legal processes in international cases can be complex. Jurisdiction, embassy involvement, hotel cooperation, and cross-border investigations all take time, and early public information is often incomplete or subject to revision as new evidence is reviewed. However, in the court of public opinion, timelines move much faster than investigations. And once a narrative forms online, it becomes extremely difficult to contain. Another major point of discussion is the communication breakdown reported by Ashlee's family. In statements shared through media and online platforms, the family has expressed frustration over how and when they were informed, stating that they were left with unanswered questions during the early stages following the incident. This emotional response has added another layer to the public conversation, shifting attention not only to what happened inside the villa, but also to how the aftermath was handled. Meanwhile, online communities have been dissecting every available detail, from past relationship dynamics to alleged arguments during the trip to behavioral interpretations based on limited information. But it is important to emphasize again, many of these claims remain unverified and are based on online discussion rather than confirmed investigative findings. As pressure builds, Authorities have reportedly expanded their review of evidence, including hotel records, security protocols, and communication logs. Some reports suggest surveillance footage and digital evidence are being reviewed, though none of this has been publicly released in full detail at the time of this narrative. And this is where the story reaches a critical point. Because in high-profile international cases, what the public sees first is rarely the full picture. Early reports often change as forensic analysis, witness statements, and digital evidence are cross-checked. That means initial assumptions, whether online or in media coverage, can later shift significantly once verified findings are presented. Despite this, the emotional impact of the case has already spread globally. Social media platforms remain flooded with commentary, theories, and debates. Some users are calling for transparency and accountability in how the case is being handled. Others are urging caution, reminding audiences that legal investigations must be allowed to conclude before conclusions are drawn. And caught in the middle of all of this is a grieving family, an ongoing investigation, and a public trying to make sense of fragmented information. Another important layer that cannot be ignored is the setting itself. This incident took place in a luxury resort environment, a controlled hospitality space that is expected to have strict safety protocols, staff supervision, and security systems in place. That raises additional questions being discussed publicly about response time, internal reporting procedures, and how incidents are managed within high-end resort systems. But again, those answers depend on official investigative findings, not speculation. As of now, the case remains open, with no final public determination released confirming exactly what occurred in the critical moments leading up to Ashlee's death. And that uncertainty is what continues to drive global attention. Because this is no longer just about one trip or one relationship. It has become a case study in how quickly narratives form in the digital age, how fast unverified claims spread, how emotionally charged situations become amplified, and how difficult it becomes to separate fact from speculation once a story goes viral. And while the internet continues to debate, investigators continue to work through evidence behind the scenes. What remains clear is this: a life was lost. A family is still seeking answers. And the full truth has not yet been publicly established. Until official findings are released in full, this case remains a developing investigation, not a concluded story. And as more details emerge in the future, the narrative may shift once again. We're going to start right where the tension breaks loose, that moment where trust turns into suspicion, and a romantic getaway starts looking like something far more disturbing than anyone expected. Because what was supposed to be a birthday celebration slowly turns into a case that has the internet asking one question over and over again: was this really a tragic incident, or something far more calculated? Ashlee Jenae travels to Zanzibar thinking she's stepping into the next chapter of her life. A luxury trip, a milestone birthday, and a fiancé by her side. From the outside, it looks like a dream situation, the kind of trip people post on social media with perfect captions and sunset photos. But behind closed doors, according to multiple accounts, the energy was completely different. Tension, arguments, distance that didn't belong on a romantic getaway. And this is where things start to shift. Because this wasn't just a couple having a disagreement on vacation. Reports suggest the conflict escalated to the point where hotel staff and even nearby guests became aware that something inside that villa was seriously wrong. Think about that for a second. You're in a high-end resort, supposed to be one of the safest, most private environments money can buy, and yet staff are allegedly being alerted to intervene in a couple's dispute. That alone changes the tone of the entire situation. Now, according to early accounts. From the investigation, Ashlee and her fiancé Joe McKen were staying at Zuri Hotel in Zanzibar, inside a private villa. What was supposed to be a peaceful, luxury stay quickly became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Because at some point during that stay, the situation escalates so intensely that staff reportedly step in and separate the two into different villas. That detail matters. Because separation in a controlled resort environment doesn't happen for minor disagreements. It happens when things cross a line where safety becomes a concern. Joe is moved to another villa on the property, physically separated from Ashlee, a decision that should have created distance and calm. But instead, what follows is a timeline that investigators are still trying to fully piece together. And this is where the story becomes even more complicated. At a certain point in the night, communication breaks down. There are conflicting accounts of what happens next, and that inconsistency is exactly what has kept this case alive in public discussion. Some reports suggest a hotel attendant was making routine rounds, checking villas as part of standard procedure. Others point toward internal communication between staff after concerns were raised earlier. But what everyone agrees on is this: something was wrong inside that villa. When the attendant approaches, Ashlee reportedly requests a phone charger. A small, normal interaction, nothing that would suggest what's coming next. The charger is handed over, and the attendant moves on, continuing routine duties. But when he returns later, things feel off. No response. Lights off. Silence inside a villa that was previously active. At that moment, protocol shifts from routine to urgent. An emergency key is used to enter. And what he reportedly finds inside immediately turns the situation into a medical emergency. Ashlee is discovered unresponsive, in critical condition, and emergency response is triggered immediately. From that point forward, everything moves fast: hospital transfer, urgent treatment attempts, and a race against time that unfortunately ends in tragedy. But here's where the case stops being just a medical timeline and starts becoming a public controversy. Because shortly after the incident, attention shifts heavily toward the fiancé. Joe McCann, who was reportedly present at the resort earlier, becomes a central figure in public speculation due to inconsistencies in timing, communication delays, and his immediate legal response once authorities begin questioning details. Now, to be clear, investigators have not publicly confirmed a final conclusion regarding intent or responsibility at this stage of public reporting. But what has fueled widespread discussion is not just the incident itself, it's the behavior surrounding it. And that's where the internet begins to split into two camps. One side sees a tragic relationship breakdown that escalated in an uncontrolled environment. The other side sees a pattern of behavior that raises questions about timing, distance, and decision-making during a critical window. Because according to early statements, there was a significant delay between when Ashlee was last confirmed safe and when emergency services were contacted. That gap becomes one of the most heavily debated points in the entire case. Not just because of what happened, but because of what didn't happen quickly enough. And when cases involve international locations, private villas, and limited immediate oversight, those gaps become even more important in understanding the full picture. Meanwhile, Ashlee's family begins publicly questioning what really happened during those final hours. They describe confusion, delayed communication, and a lack of clear answers in the immediate aftermath. And as those concerns grow, so does public pressure for a deeper investigation. Because at this point, the case is no longer just about one incident inside a villa. It becomes about timeline integrity, communication delays, witness accounts, and the role of every individual present during that critical window. Not with conclusions, not with certainty, but with a growing list of unanswered questions that set the stage for everything that comes next. Because once investigators start reconstructing those final hours in detail, the story begins to look very different depending on which piece of the timeline you focus on. We go deeper into those contradictions, the relationship dynamics, the hotel statements, and the early investigative findings that started shifting public perception in real time. Before you go, there's one thing you need to understand about cases like this. They don't just end when the headlines fade. They stay open in people's minds because every detail raises another question. Every timeline gap creates another theory. And every silence from the key people involved makes the story even louder online. That's exactly why this case has spread the way it has. But here's the important part: real answers don't come from speculation. They come from facts, verified reports, and full investigations. And right now, a lot of those answers are still unclear or officially unconfirmed. So the real question becomes, are we looking at a tragic situation that spiraled out of control, or something that still hasn't been fully uncovered yet? Now I want you to take a second and think about that. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're real lives, real families, and real consequences that don't disappear when the video ends. If you've been following this case, stay alert to updates. Don't rely on rumors or clips taken out of context.